how to prioritize self-care in your life and what it looks like for you. Because I think that's something you've had to learn and through some very like big challenges on your emotional, physical, and mental health.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that it was interesting. So as a healthcare provider, I'm always telling people and teaching people, it's like, we have to do this to take care of ourselves. And we have to do not to take care of ourselves. And then, it's like, I'm like, sometimes people, they listen to you and it's really rewarding. They come back and you see this progress that they've made. And I can't even tell you like the warm feeling that gives you. But then there's other times where it's like people, they don't want to listen to you, and, trying to get the root of why that is, in a 15-20 minute appointment slot sometimes is just very difficult and challenging.
Right. And
I found myself getting frustrated, but then I started thinking about it. I'm like, well, why don't I do those things myself? In a lot of respects, growing up, I was, it was we had a unique upbringing, and I never really, I was very like goal oriented, but at the same time, like I was like an angry little kid, right? Mm-hmm. And I had to, and I feel like I spent all these years with frustration and anger, and it just built up and up and up and up. And I'd get into trouble in school, and I just never really knew how to handle that. I never developed those coping skills. Yeah, I do have to give a shout out to, I would tell you the first person that really started teaching me how to like look at myself in a mirror and analyze how can I help myself was actually my fourth grade teacher, Miss Holliker. So she is the first like person that I had from whether it be like a coaching or a teaching environment that I felt like took an active interest in who I was, and really taught me how to identify, okay, why am I so angry? Why am I so mad? And if I actually had to go to the root of it, I would say it was Miss Holliker and some of the things that she started teaching me at a young age. And so as I started going through like my life, I realized that, it's like I'm working so hard to get through school. I'm working so hard to take care of patients, but my mental health is, really taking a hit for this. And, and it's going to start to take a toll on my relationships with people and my wife, and God bless my wife. My wife is my rock, and she is, I can't even tell you how like thankful I am to have her in my life because she's so calm and steadfast, But I remember I was actually out on a jog one day and it had been snowing and I was a long jog and I was just in a dark place mentally. And I came back and I walked into the house and I looked at Kendra and I said, I need some help. Like, I need to do something about this. Like, I'm on a jog and it's normally where I clear my head. That's my safe place. And I'm so angry and I don't even know why. And so I started my journey then. And I started I found someone to talk to. And I found, and the first thing I'll tell you, when you go and talk to somebody, if you go to a counselor, if whatever it may be, a church, a pastor, the first thing you have to do is go in and with the mindset of, I'm going to be honest about what the issues are. Like, there's a lot of times people say, well, I didn't make any more counseling. That's because you're not really willing to face those like hard issues, or come to terms with maybe some of my imperfections or my flaws and things that I need to work on. And so we started down that pathway. And I really found that, like, for me, taking care of myself. So I was an athlete. I abruptly stopped playing sports in college. It was a mistake, and I know that now. But at the time, I couldn't see that because I saw it as a way out. And I can talk more about that later. I don't want to go into too much now, but I needed to find outlets. So I started riding motocross. And for some people are like, well, motocross, how can that be therapeutic? Because it started kind of appeasing, like not appeasing, but really helped me. Like, it's very therapeutic in the sense when I go out on that track, it's just me out there and it's silence and it's you got this motorcycle roaring in your ears and you're jumping 40, 50 feet over a tabletop, but at the same time, it's so calm and peaceful. The other aspect of it is I had to start exercising again. like on a regular basis. I say this happened when I was on a jog. I was on a very out of shape jog. It was not a good one, you know?
Yeah.
And I find that when I do that, it's better. And then I had to start like accepting who I was and how I got there. And when I started doing those things, I started finding more peace. And I'm far from 100% of the way being there. But, you know, I exercise is a big part of my life. I needed to change my career path and trajectory because being in my children's life is probably my number one priority. Yeah. It is my number one priority. And so I had to make a change there, which wasn't necessarily like the best thing for my career from a growth standpoint, but it was the best thing for our lives from a personal standpoint and watching them and having the opportunity to see them grow up. So that, and I would say, and I'm the kind of person that has to let things out. Like if I bottle it up and I keep it bottled up, at some point in time, it's going to explode everywhere. And it's usually ugly for me and ugly for everybody around me. So I would say having that outlet and somebody to talk to. And in my career, you have to be careful about that.
Yeah.
You know, we always talk about medical providers needing to be, you know, the rocks for everybody else, but medical providers don't really have a good outlet for themselves.
Yeah.
You know,
absolutely. That's such a good point.
It's frowned upon it within, it's like this unspoken thing within the community. Like I know so many providers that suffer from depression and anxiety disorders and post-traumatic stress. Right. And they're too afraid to go talk to somebody because of the perception of what, from other people's standpoint, what that may be. So going to actually be able to talk to somebody, for me, that was like a big, like probably one of the scariest moments of my life. Like I got to do this, but that's an important part of it. And then just, I would say overall, you know, eating healthy and just coming to terms with my past too. Yeah. And being at peace with it. I don't know, kind of a rambling way to answer the question, but
no, and we'll get into all those things more, but yeah, there's a lot to that. And I think, you know, one point that's interesting to me is you work in the healthcare industry, yet I think these are some of these stigmas we have to deal with in the culture. Yet you would think they would encourage you and want you to get all the help so you can be the healthiest version of yourself, helping others. But instead, there's a fear, I think, that you'll be, you know, branded a certain way or maybe lose some privileges because you aren't seen as being well. And that's very interesting. That's a whole other conversation within itself, just within that industry.
It's a sad one. I see so many of my colleagues and friends suffering with it, you know, and I would say COVID's put like a whole new strain.
Absolutely.
On that.
Sure.
You know, because we went from at the beginning of the pandemic to, you know, people calling nurses and doctors and respiratory therapists heroes to now, you know, if you bring up something like, you know, the vaccine, like for my job, as a requirement, I have to ask about their vaccination status because procedure, whatever it may be. We need to know what are the risks for them, what are the risks for us, and we need to make sure that we explain those risks. Right. And people can become very upset when you start talking about that if they have a strong feeling, for example, against the vaccine. Sure. And so that can create some hostility. And I've had to learn to really diffuse those situations too. So my fellow healthcare providers, it's been as it's been for so many Americans for different reasons. Sure. I can only speak to the healthcare side of it. Right. It's been a challenging time. Time. Yeah. In an already challenging profession. Yeah, exactly. And I actually listened to one of your other podcasts. I can't remember, was it Stephanie that said it or was it Amy? One of the two said that they're introverted, and I'm very introverted. It was Amy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I thought I knew it was Amy. Yeah. But I would say that I myself am very introverted, and I have to have like those moments. Like I like to write. Yeah. And I have to have those quiet moments to myself where I can write but the problem is, you know, finding that happy medium where I don't feel guilty because I'm not teaching Hazley I just got Hazley a Stasics, which is like this electric dirt bike. Yeah. Teaching her how to ride a dirt bike or teaching, you know, going out and throwing pop flies to Deacon or whatever it may be. But I still have to, for me to be a better version to them, I have to do those things. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And finding that balance, which is so important. Confidently
setting boundaries. And I would say this comes up for you in so many places. It comes up in family. It comes up in just medical. Like we all know that Caleb is a medical professional. So Caleb consequently gets inundated with all the family's medical questions. Anytime there's an issue, Caleb gets a phone call. I'm included, guilty as charged. What I'm trying to be more mindful of these days is like, okay, is that something, especially since COVID, I've been like, is that something he needs to take on? Are these questions I can get answered myself, and try to like only go to him if it's like, all right, I'm not, my husband is like, call Caleb. I'm like, not every time. He has to just sometimes be my brother and brother-in-law, your brother-in-law. So talk to me about boundaries, because that's just within us.
Yeah. So that's hard because like inside I'm actually like I like to make everybody happy. Right?
You do. You are a helper.
I'm a helper, and that's my objective is like, how can I help? And early on in my career, it wasn't so bad because I was brand new out of school. And I was fresh and I was super excited. I had all this knowledge and I just wanted to give the knowledge to the world. And then there comes a time where you start to get really tired and really burned out.
Yeah.
And it's funny because usually questions like Kendra actually would keep track of like the number of texts I'd get from, and it's not just family, it's just
anybody who knows you.
3 years ago, and they got my number in their phone, and they're texting me like, hey, my friend's got such and such on their CT scan. What do you think? And I'm like, well, considering I can't see to the CT scan and the only information I have is what you're giving me, I can't give you a whole lot.
Yeah.
So I would have to give like disclaimers, like this is in no way a binding medical decision. I'm just giving you my input. But setting boundaries, it was hard for me because I wanted to make those people happy, but I also had to start like to a degree letting them know like I can't do this all the time. Like in a way I had to start saying, like that's so much of my life during the day that if it's a serious situation, it's very different. I've dealt with some of those recently.
Absolutely.
But like, if it's like, I actually just had one where, a friend of ours, their son fell down. They live like 3 miles from us, fell down pretty hard downhill, busted themselves up pretty good. I was on a jog anyways. They asked me to stop by. So I was like, why not? It was a jog 700 feet down the hill. I'm like, I wasn't planning on going that far downhill. And so I get down there and I check him out and he's okay. And then I run home. But that was a situation where I'm like, okay, I'm happy to do this. I'm already out. I'm really close. Fine. But then there's other times where I'm like, I have to tell people like, I'm not really the expert in that field. It's like, even if I know the answer to the question, I'm like, you have a qualified medical provider. And if you don't, then you need to find one to go and have this conversation with. And that's where it started from the medical standpoint. I would tell people, you have this specialist in your area, go and talk to them.
Yeah.
Or whether it be, and the hard part too, this is probably the hardest part, is when I know an answer to a question, but I'm afraid to give it to them because I'm afraid of how they're going to feel about me after I give them the answer.
Oh, wow.
And so that's a tough one because I've had that happen a lot, whether it be family members or friends, where I'm like, I had to come, and I had to come to a position where I had to be like, they wanted my opinion. I'm going to actually give it to them. And, that if they don't like that, maybe that's the way that they're not going to want to talk to me about it anymore. But at the same time, I started just telling people, listen, I'm tired. This is the weekend. This is my time with my family.
Yeah.
I need to take that time to be with them. Unless this is an emergency, please, you can set up an appointment, come and see me. I'd be more than happy to have that conversation with you then. I have a lot of times when it's really where they're close to me, my preference is not to see family. So like I have somebody that I really like, and I think they'd be perfect for you. And I would send them to them. I've even done research for people who live in other areas, and talk to like colleagues that I may have in that area, said, hey, I know someone, I have a friend, they live there. Close colleague. I respect them a lot. They know so-and-so, go and talk to this person.
Sure.
So from a medical standpoint, that's tough. From a family standpoint, that's probably the most challenging.
Yeah. We've had a lot of conversations about this, and
Yeah.
I've had to navigate stuff ahead of you and differently and in ways at times that was hard on our relationship, you and I, because I had to create some boundaries that were healthy for me, but there was a cost to that when you were younger and still living at home and how you and I both I had to navigate the guilt. You had to navigate my absence. So I think that's been going on our entire lives. And now as you're an adult, learning to navigate those in a way that's healthy for your family. And it's complicated.
It's very complicated. You know, when you went off to college, you know, I remember just crying and crying and crying, you know, because like, you know, I lost you and like, you know, I lost your friends. I felt like, you know, it's like, that was a hard thing for me. I remember every time you came back, I called you Sissy. I always wanted to go run at the track with you. Like that was a big thing for me. Like every time you come in home, or I'd ask you to bring snow home from Pullman, you know? And, but I remember, you know, waking up crying and calling mom and dad, calling you just so I could talk to you because I missed you. Because it was a unique thing because like you were so much older than me. You were like having this other motherly like figure in my life. Because when you're that young, you don't really understand, you know, you grasp onto who, you know, the people that are there. And I looked up to you so much, you know, and all of your friends and everybody that you hung out with. I just thought it was like the coolest thing in the world. And then you go to college, and then I got used to being at college. We'd come over and visit. And I remember being a junior cougar, and I thought that was awesome. And I remember you started dating Brady, and I just thought like the world just revolved around Brady. You know, he's this college baseball player, big, wonderful personality, you know, and you know, Pat, you know, I can't say enough about Pat and getting to sit back right behind, you know, when Brady's pitching, getting to sit like right in that little area section behind, right on the fence, basically. For me, then it became really cool. I was like, wow, this is awesome. You know? Yeah.
Every little boy's dream. You're sitting in the box behind the diamond.
It was awesome. I'm like, this is crazy cool. And I still have like autographed baseballs. I still have an autographed hat from Brady there. But then there was that time frame where something I would tell you, I probably actually should have, I had a hard time coming up with the characteristics, right?
Yeah.
Intuitive, I would say, might be the one that's been my saving grace most of my life. Yeah. Inherently kind of knew something was wrong. Right. You know, whether, you know, especially around the time of the wedding and things going, you know, whatever was happening there. I didn't understand the dynamic. You know, obviously in the depth of it and everything, but I understood something was wrong. Yeah. And I went from that time where you were there and then you were gone. And that was really hard. And, you know, it wasn't your responsibility to raise me. You're my sister. But I didn't understand, again, the dynamic of everything that was happening. All I knew is my sissy was gone. Yeah. You know, and that was the first, honestly, of many occasions in my life where I felt like somebody was there and then they were gone. Yeah. As we dealt with it with Clint, my older brother. Yeah. You know, and, you know, the trials and tribulations that he's went through and overcome and went through again and overcome and just kind of went through that process, and times where Clint would be gone for a long time. Yeah. And that was hard because he was my bubba, you know, and that would be rough. And then there's me and Chris, you know, and Chris, you know, the thing about Chris, you know, is Chris comes across as this rough and gruff guy. And I think the hardest thing for me when I see Chris is actually probably, when you chisel off all of the surrounding, I would say he's probably the kindest heart. And I know it's hard for people maybe to believe, but he's probably the kindest person one of the kindest people I know. And I saw that in that time frame because he was there for me so much. Yeah. You know,
he was a steady one. He was always there. He never left.
Never left. And he taught me how to drive a car, a stick shift. You know, he taught me how to hunt, I went hunting with Dad, but I hunted all the time with Chris. You know, just from a time standpoint, Chris had more of it. And so that was hard. But then as we've gotten older, also starting to realize, you know, some of that frustration, that anger that I had as a little kid, I had to really start to evaluate, well, why was that? You know? And Dad and he would probably agree to this. We have had a strained relationship at times.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a long time where I was afraid to set that boundary or scared to set that. But as I've gotten older, whether it be for my children, whether it be for whatever the situation may be, there's been situations where I've been like, we have to separate ourselves from this situation.
Yeah.
This is not like I'm, writing you out of my life, but this is a time where we have to take some time apart, and I need to process this so that I handle it appropriately.
Right.
So that I don't let my anger and frustration get the best of me.
Yeah.
It's like sometimes I'll write an email and I'll just write it on a Word doc.
Mm-hmm.
If I know it's going to be an intense email, and I'll read it and I save it and I read it the next day. A lot of great leaders give that recommendation.
Yeah.
And that for me, a lot of times when it comes to setting boundaries, when I tell people like I need a timeout, it's really about me sitting back and processing what's happened and then figuring out the next steps and the best way to move forward.
Yep.
And that's a tough one, especially with family.
It is. And I think, as you and I both know, I've set my boundaries. That tough period that Caleb's talking about, there was a 10-year period where my parents and I were not around each other. I had had a couple of children, and there was just some behaviors that were happening that I needed to separate myself from and deal with myself and ask them to come back in a healthier way. And so after 10 years, we were able to do that, but that had its effects. And that was a boundary that I had to lay at that time. And even to this day, just different boundaries we have to lay within that to make sure we're doing the best for ourselves. I'm in my third round of therapy at 52 years old, as I continue to kind of peel back things. So you hit on an important thing earlier of being authentic and just having the capacity to deal with that next thing. I think sometimes as you unwrap things, you're like, oh, there's something else underneath that other thing, but I just couldn't process it at the time because this other thing had to be dealt with first. So having had my own journey in that, and also wanting you as a younger person, I'm like, many times I've like, deal with this now. I don't want you to be bumping into this at my age. I want you to deal with it now so you can be healthier sooner. And it's a tricky thing about boundaries is they're great to put in place. They're very hard to communicate to people that don't understand boundaries. And there's a lot of people that I would say I didn't have a lot of boundaries other than I'd set a few with family, but on the whole still we're really coming to understand boundaries over the last 2 years. And so I think for you too, you've had to learn how to not only communicate them, but communicate in sometimes in situations where people don't really understand what that means.
Yeah, that's tough too, and enforcing them.
Right.
That's the enforcement of it is difficult.
Yeah.
It's family. I know family's perfect, right?
Right. Yeah.
And
everybody's got their shit.
Everybody, exactly. Everybody's got their demons to deal with, their skeletons in their closet. And so when it comes to I use dad and I as an example,
right?
And so if dad listens to this, I don't want him to hate me for it. I want him to understand this is what my thought process was.
Yeah.
And, I loved my dad growing up, but we didn't always get along.
Yeah.
Now,
same.
And part of that, in the dynamic, you talked about how we dealt with similar things, but somewhat differently. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So he, I think, saw a lot of similar characteristics in me as he saw in you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when you guys were going through your stuff, that frustrated him.
Yeah.
And so
sure. And you took the brunt of that.
Yeah. And he would take it out on me at times, and what breaks my heart is that when I really think about it and I have the opportunity to look back on some of those situations is, dad had a messed up childhood.
Very.
And,
with no coping mechanisms or people around him that had any ability to model it healthy to him.
Not, whatsoever, Yeah. The fact that he really turned out as good as he did and was able to accomplish a lot of things that he accomplished, I think is a testament to his perseverance in that regard.
Sure. And he's willing to learn, he went through a lot of years where he wasn't, But I would say the last 20 years, he's willing to continue to evolve and learn and and try to be better.
Yeah. And that's, I think, all you can, that the willingness aspect to it is as much as you can at least ask from somebody,
Sure.
You know, whether the evolution occurs really is up to them.
Sure.
But, you have to have that willingness to take that step to do it.
Absolutely.
And, even recently, I've seen that in him, and him going to counseling actually, and seeking out help for those things, whatever it may be, I always want to make sure that I acknowledge those things too, because, I myself, I would argue Kendra knows me better than me, but I know myself better than this about anybody next to Kendra.
Sure.
And I know, every day I'm a work in progress,
Mm-hmm. We all are.
And,
but it's being willing to do that work though. You're willing to do the work. And I think that's where both you and I will get frustrated and I think it's hard when when you've sought to help yourself and you know how much it helps you. And when and other people aren't willing to do that, it's really hard. Brady struggles with this too. My husband, he's like, okay, if you're not willing to do the work, I don't have a lot of space for that, know, and it's really hard to I'm going to love you from afar. I'm going to extend empathy. But I think that you and I both, that's something we really have to work on because we are understanding that. And we do know you can do if you're willing to do the work.
Yeah. And I think the thing that people have to realize too, in those situations where it's when somebody recommends, hey, let's go to counseling, let's work on this. We're not saying we're perfect and we've got it all figured out.
Right. Absolutely.
And you need to be more like me. And I think that sometimes when we communicate that message, that is the perception,
Sure.
And you actually just said it. It's more or less, hey, I've seen this works for me.
Yeah.
You've got some stuff. I think that if you could unpack it a little bit, you would start to feel better too.
Yeah.
But again, you got to be willing and wanting to do that.
Well, and it's scary to face those demons. It's scary. And you've got to be willing to kind of take what comes with that. And it's not easy. It's hard. And there's some dark spaces within that. So it's not just this neatly unwrapped package. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to be all better. I mean, it just doesn't go that way. So I think that makes it complicated too. This rolls nicely, and you've learned a lot about this because you've had physical things show up that I think you now understand were tied to our emotional health, is taking care of our emotional health as much as our physical health, because you've had some physical things that are absolutely, I think you've learned. I have too, not as serious as yours, but still. So talk about how you see that tied together and what you've learned about that.
Yeah. So the reason I was interested in cardiovascular is because starting at a young age, I started having heart palpitations. For people who don't know.
Very young.
Yeah. And I didn't really know what was going on. I just remember feeling lightheaded and dizzy. And I actually I use this example every time I would talk to a cardiologist when I was growing up. I remember I was walking into the gym. It was middle school, 7th grade. And all of a sudden, I started feeling lightheaded. And I remember everything was getting very spotty around me. And I was like, what is wrong with me? I just ate lunch. I haven't done anything. I was going to be playing basketball with my friends. I hadn't even ran anywhere yet. And it's funny how the body works. So I intuitively kind of squatted down and started rubbing my neck. Mm-hmm. And then I started feeling better. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm good. Let's go. And what happened is I was actually, so you have the vagal nerve, right? And the vagal nerve triggers basically the parasympathetic response to slow down your heart rate.
Yeah.
What I was actually doing intuitively, and same as squatting down actually, can stimulate that vagal response. And then my heart rate slowed down and I felt better and I went and played basketball.
Yeah.
And it started happening more and more through high school. I remember one drill, like you, I was the fast kid, and I was always hustling, and I was usually the first guy in sprints, whatever it may be, and I was really lagging behind. And I remember Tom Bate, he pulls me over and he was like, and he's like, you okay? I'm like, Coach, I don't know. I don't feel okay. I'm like, my heart is just pounding. And he's like, he takes my pulse and he looks at me and he's like, he calls our trainer, Dave Knopple, who actually married Kendra and I. Calls him out there. Dave, checks me out. He's like, let's go sit in the back of the van. And so he goes and he was a retired Army medic, this kid, he knows his stuff. And we're sitting back there and he's giving me some fluids. And then as soon as I start getting cold drinks in me, I start feeling better again. And again, so that cold stimulates the vagal response. My nerve slows down. And so I'm like, okay, I feel good again. And that's when Dave was like, I don't think so. He's like, there's something else going on here. Yeah. So then they originally told me I was having panic attacks and they gave me medicine for panic attacks. And that didn't help. It actually made it worse. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm doing terrible right now. Yeah. And then I went and saw Anwar Ayub, Dr. Ayub, who actually is the gentleman that really inspired me to go into medicine. Yeah. And he put me on a beta blocker and said, I think you have this going on with your heart. And the rest, and it slowed my heart rate down. And I didn't have episodes for a while. Then I got to college and stress mounted. And as that stress went up, people don't realize this. So I had a condition called PSVT, paroxysmal supraventricular tachycardia. And
glad that he's the one pronouncing it, not me.
Yeah. And so it basically means that your heart would just suddenly and abruptly take off at a rapid pace. We'll just keep it simple, right? Yeah. And I walked into the gym, and again, this is ironic. It happened in a gym. I was getting ready to play with my buddy Victor, and my best friend Victor. He's like my brother. And I'm getting ready to shoot a basket, and I'm like, and then I got lightheaded, and I was like, oh man, what is wrong with me? And I put my hand on my chest. And I was like, Victor. I was like, he walks over. I was like, does it feel like my heart's beating fast? And he puts his hand on my chest and he starts freaking out. He's like, oh my gosh. He's like, calm down. And I was like, you need to calm down right now because you're really freaking me out.
You're not helping me.
You're not helping. I was like, will you please go get Kendra? He's like, no, he's like, you need to call 911. I was like, no, you need to go get Kendra. So Kendra's my wife. And she was like always been like my calming presence. And she comes down and she's like, okay, sweetheart. She's like, I think we should probably go to the hospital at least. I go, no, let's just go to the student rec, medical center. And they were both like, I don't think that's the right place. I'm like, I don't want to go to the hospital. Let's just go there. So we go there and they couldn't figure out how to hook up an EKG. And I was like, oh gosh. So by the time I got to the hospital, it had stopped. And I was like, I feel better again. And so then this starts to happen more and more. Yeah. And what I noticed is this like stress was definitely a trigger. Sure. And amongst other things, but then sometimes I'd be completely relaxed. And this is actually an important point about stress and what it does to your body. Yeah. I'd be completely relaxed. I remember I was watching a Mariner game one time and we were at Kendra's parents' house and I was working at Norpac. I'd been working summer help and I was on my 7 days off. Norpac's a paper mill in Longview, Washington. And I'm watching the game relaxed and all of a sudden my heart takes off, just explodes. And this time I feel like I'm going to pass out. So then they take me to the hospital. They actually gave me some IV metoprolol. A lot of times they use diltiazem, but they use metoprolol on me because I was already on a beta blocker. And then I started feeling better. And they're like, well, were you stressed? And I was like, no, I wasn't stressed. I was actually completely calm. On my 7 days off, I was fine. But that wasn't true at all. Because I was stressed. I just didn't realize it.
Yeah. All that unprocessed stuff.
Exactly. And so it's interesting because when you look at the like people who have SVT, it's always like panic attacks and SVT go hand in hand. Yeah. And it's the chicken and the egg question. What came first? Right. Usually SVT, for me, I had true SVT because it abruptly onset and they would like abruptly stop. Sure. But there are still things that will trigger that aberrant rhythm, and whether it be caffeine. So I cut out caffeine. I started doing all this stuff and it worked for a while but it continued to happen on and off. There's one time where Kendra would argue I lost consciousness. I don't think I did. If she was in here, she'd be, no, you definitely did. I guess I passed out at the end of the bed. And I was still, and I remember I was kind of like still like in a haze, and I was like, I was there, but I wasn't. And I say haze, not daze, because it was very foggy. That's the easiest way to like describe. Right. Yeah. And so either way, I end up finally getting in. I I go to a good cardiologist. He puts me on some medication and it really starts to get that part of it under control. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't get the stress part of it under control.
Right.
So then I go to college, right? I go to school, grad school and stuff like that. And
graduate from Johns Hopkins. I'm just going to throw it in there. He's a Smarty McSmarty.
Yes, I went to Johns Hopkins. And
I throw that in there because very stressful.
It's very stressful. Like it is it's high achieving.
Yeah. Like the highest.
Yeah. And then I'm always been like a go-getter. It's like, I'm going to like do it or all or nothing. And so I did an accelerated program where basically you cram another bachelor's degree in all your grad school stuff. And I did it in 2.5 years.
Yeah.
And so you're doing all your clinical work, you're doing all of your actual classes, everything all at once, which is brutal. But I go there and I really start to find my stride. And I start that's where I got into more cardiovascular research.
Sure.
And I started developing actually screening protocols to identify risk factors for young kids with who are at risk for sudden cardiovascular death. Mm-hmm. And that was all well and good. And that was a great process. And I learned so much from it, but it still didn't fix the underlying issue. Mm-hmm. But I still kept having like these anxious moments where I'm like, this is different. I could tell the difference. I was like, the SVT was abrupt. The anxiety was slow onset.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was the moment where I would say where I was like, I think there's something else really is playing a role in this. Mm-hmm. And that's when I had to start like doing some soul searching, mm-hmm. And I'm a nurse practitioner. I had the choice of MD, physician route, nurse practitioner route. My wife, again, knowing me better than I knew myself at the time, said, I really know you. And I think that the NP route would be a better route for you. And I was a little bit frustrated at the time, to be honest with you. But I was like, okay, you know what? She goes, that's going to be a lot of school, a lot of fellowship. The fellowship was the big aspect of it for what I wanted to do, how long it was going to take. She goes, I think this will get you doing what you want to do in a more reasonable way. And I'm like, you know what? There might be, again, something to this. And I'm glad I listened to her because, a decade later, I can tell you she made the right choice for me.
Yeah.
But I had to get to a point where I could make the right decisions for myself.
Yeah.
And not let somebody else do it and recognize it for me.
Sure.
And so that's why, even now I work primarily with spines now, even though cardiovascular and pulmonary is my background. I work in an interventional clinic. I'm a needle jockey now. I specialize in procedures. That's what I do. But I remember the moment I actually made the first decision for myself and for my family, not just because I felt like it was the right choice for all involved, but it was definitely the right choice for me, is when I decided to walk away from cardiovascular after a 16.5-hour day. And I was like, I'm done with this.
Yeah.
But it wasn't easy to walk away from that, given all the time and effort I put into actually trying to become this. It's really about living up to expectations too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Which we will talk about, but 100%.
I found myself, I was like, why am I doing a lot of this?
Yeah.
It's like, I was like chasing this like invisible carrot,
Yeah.
And it's like, where is this coming from? It's like, I'm not doing this because this makes me happy anymore. I'm doing this because I feel like people expect this of me and I have to do this. Yeah.
And that gaining acceptance thing and being good enough thing and all those things that we have wrestled with that are just a outcome of the environment we grew up in.
The acceptance, the needing to, that's a big part of it,
Yeah.
And wanting to be, it's funny because like when you were talking to me about an intro song, Bittersweet Symphony by the Verve, so much of my life, I feel like your value is applied to a dollar amount or your value, and that, and your success in that regard. Mm-hmm. And I have had to get to a point where I'm like, you know what, that's not the meaning of life. No. There's so much more to it than the things that you own or the, letters behind your name or the, your publications or whatever it may be. Yeah. It's like, what makes you happy? What, and because if you're happy, then it bleeds into everything else in your life.
Absolutely.
You're a better husband, you're a better wife, whatever it may be. You're a better father, a better mother, a better brother, whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm not
better to yourself.
And better to yourself, and learning to like, I had to get to a place where I even liked myself, and that was the other aspect of that too. Because they say, love yourself. I'm like, well, usually when getting to love is a stepwise progression. And for me, I had to get to a point where I even liked myself. Yeah. Let alone love myself.
Yep.
That's hard.
It is. That's his own journey. How can we support ourselves in living unapologetically? And this really we're kind of banging together a lot of things because we've talked about expectations. So talk about living unapologetically first, and then because these all kind of tie together. I'm kind of looking at how I want to approach this because they're so tied in, but start out with living unapologetically and how you're learning to do that.
That's hard.
It is.
That's actually, if I had to pick one thing, I would say that's one of the hardest or the hardest.
Right.
And I say that because sometimes the things that we do, they have reactions, right?
Right.
And they're going to be sometimes accepted, and people are going to be like, okay, I'm okay with that. I'm good with that. But more often than not, when you talk about living unapologetically, that means that you're going to be making decisions that really ruffle some feathers. Yep. And when you're going back to the acceptance idea, it's like, well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I don't want to, make somebody feel bad about themselves because I felt bad about myself. And I don't want to make somebody else feel that way. Sure. But at some point in time, you have to, you have to, because if you don't, those things will continue to consume you. Yeah. I'm still working on that. And I won't even say that I've even gotten all the way there. Mm-hmm. I can actually use last night as an example at Deacon's basketball game. Deacon, my little guy, he's 7 years old. And he's
same age as Caleb was when Brady and I got married, to give you context.
Exactly. Yeah. There you go. So he's 7 years old. And it's funny, you look, he's the youngest kid he's second grade. He's the youngest kid on a third grade AAU competitive basketball team. Mm-hmm. And he's really learning the game, and it's fast paced, and he's got a lot to learn. Mm-hmm. So he comes in last night and he swaps out with a kid, and they put him on the biggest kid on the court. Mm. And I'm like, oh, this is not going to end well. I'm like, because Deacon is feisty. That kid on defense, he is going to be on you, like right on ice. He's just he is stuck to you. Yeah. And this kid, I could tell, was just getting frustrated. So the kid kept pushing Deacon, and I'm like, and the ref wasn't calling it. He kept pushing Deacon. And then he almost punches him, like open hand. I shouldn't say punch him, but jabs him back and hits him in the chest. And I thought Deacon might back off a little bit then, but no, Deacon didn't back off. Deacon comes right back up, and he's guarding this kid. And he's playing clean, but he's just all over this kid. Yeah. And the kid they can't get the ball to him, and is driving this kid insane. So this kid actually suplexes Deacon, basically, hurts, almost hurts, really just takes him out. It was intentional. Yeah. It was, I was frustrated.
Sure.
And I stood up, and I was and I yelled, I go, that can't happen. I kept it PG, mm-hmm. but I was like, that can't happen. That is unacceptable. I'm like, something needs to be done here, mm-hmm. And this parent that was for the other team that was sitting next to us starts losing her mind on me. And she's like, it's a kid's game. Sit down. It's a kid's game. And I'm like, I understand that it's a kid's game. I'm not mad about wins or losses. I'm just upset right now because my kid just got waylaid by this kid, and it should have been at least a technical. Yeah. And it wasn't. Yeah. And I started to feel bad because did I do something wrong? Yeah. I was like, did I do something wrong? Should I have kept my composure and not said anything at all? Or do I feel okay about what I just did? And when I look back on it, and I started feeling that guilt because this woman's screaming at me so much so that one of our friends had to come up and like stand between her. Like, he's calm, you're yelling. Let's just diffuse the situation. And I was like, and she goes like, this is a kid's basketball. I'm like, you're right. This is a kid's basketball game. Calm down. I'm not yelling at the kid. I'm just saying that we have to stop that kind of action on the court because it's happening too much. This has been, that can't happen. He could have gotten really hurt. The reason I was going down there is because Deacon's laying on the floor. Yeah. I'm like, oh, he's hurt. I'm like, this is not good. Then Deacon being himself just pops right back up.
Yeah.
But then I come home and I start feeling guilty about it. And I'm like, should I have apologized? And I did apologize, like, to my fan section. I'm like, hey, I'm sorry if you felt like, and one of the moms actually goes, no, you weren't out of line at all. It felt really nice to hear that. She goes, sure. If that was my son, she goes, we were watching it the whole time. And she goes, Deacon's such a sweet little guy. She's like, there's no way that should have ever happened. It should have been a technical. And she's like, you were just worried about your son, is really what it comes down to. But there's different things like that where it's like, I feel the guilt. I'm like, they're yelling at me. Yeah. And then I start to immediately assume, because from a background standpoint, getting yelled at means I've done something wrong. Right. And it's like, well, did I really do something wrong there? Yeah. I wasn't one of those crazed fans that you see on YouTube or something that's like yelling obscenities. All I was standing up and saying, that can't happen. Literally the words came out of my mouth. Yeah. And I looked at my buddy, Nate, who was sitting next to me, who had his little boys on the team. And I go, was I out of line there? He goes, not at all. He goes, in fact, you probably handled it better than I would if that would have been my son that got knocked down. Yeah. But then I come home last night, like I said again, and I'm like, did I do something wrong? Yeah. Yeah. And then even when it comes to like setting boundaries, like you're talking before. Yeah. I set a boundary. I'm like, this can't happen. This is unacceptable. Yeah. But then I feel guilty about it at some point. And I'm like, should I start to cave on this, or do I have to stay steadfast and speak my mind? And there's been situations like that recently where I did have to speak my mind. And it was like understanding that, what I have to say might hurt that person, but it is the honest truth, and the best thing in that situation. Yeah. And I think and also too, you were able to sit back and unpack where that guilt was coming from, because we did grow up in a house. There was a lot of yelling, and there just was. And so, but you were able, I think that's something you were able to do that maybe 10 years ago, you wouldn't have been able to make that connection. When I didn't want to have children for a long time, because I didn't want to have, this sounds bad now, but I didn't want to have a kid that was like me. Yeah. And we'll unpack why that you felt that way. And so I feel like I've went a long ways to try to make sure Hazley and Deacon. Hazley's a little bit easier because Hazley is naturally just hilarious and laid back. But I saw certain characteristics in Deacon that were similar to mine that could go one way or another. Yeah. But also depending on the environment. I would say, you were not in an environment where some of those characteristics were celebrated, and you've learned from that. You were a feeler. You were very, you were a big feeler, and he's a big feeler and a big feeling heart. And that wasn't celebrated in our home. That wasn't considered masculine, it wasn't manly. And so you have, and we're going to get to, because I want you to share this really cool thing. Hang on, listeners. My brother does this really cool thing with his son at night before he goes to bed, that if you're up for it, I want you to share later. But yeah, I think you were able to kind of unpack all of that and understand all of that. Because this little guy he's just a full-fledged kid. He's an empath. He's a feeler. He's the kid that gets voted most compassionate in his little class, but he's also fierce. He's riding motorcycles and playing baseball and sticking like glue to the kid twice as big as him playing basketball. So he's all the things, and all of those things you and Kendra do a really good job of celebrating all of those things equally and well, and not treating one as more important than the other, but all the parts of him are celebrated. And I think that's something you've learned because you did not have that experience. Yeah, no, it's true. And that's what I would say I'm most proud, because he's a really good, talented little baseball player. Yeah. Watching him play baseball, you don't think you're watching a 7-year-old. He looks like, a 9, 10-year-old kid out there playing baseball. Yeah. And But what I'm most proud of is when he comes home and he gets the compassion award. You brought that up.
Yeah.
I've gotten that so many times.
Yeah.
Or like they have like these like little things they'll hand out at school, like the kindness, like I recognize you were being kind today.
Yeah.
He's the kid that will go out of his way if he sees the kid on the playground that doesn't have somebody to play with.
Yeah.
To play with them.
Yeah.
And it's such a tough thing because I'm trying, I want him to stay that way.
Yeah.
But we live in a world where that's not necessarily celebrated.
I know.
You know? And so I also have to teach him sometimes when he gets his feelings hurt about something not going away he thought it would when it, he thought he was being nice, whatever it may be. Buddy, that's also the way the world works. Yeah. Like the world is not always going to be fair. Yeah. And so at the same time, you have to have, recognize who you are. Mm-hmm. You have to have some thick skin sometimes but stay steadfast in, the person that you want to become, and that's the most important thing you can teach me. You have to be tough, but you have to be loving and you have to be caring. You have to be forgiving. And I think you can be all of those things without sacrificing any one of them. Right. Right.
And you just have to continue to be the voice of that. I am having more and more conversations with people I know with kids your age that are starting to see that. I have a couple of people that I've talked to in the podcast that are teachers that are starting to talk about more. Ellie Woolwine on the Christensen family episode brought this up. And then Kaylee Blankenship again brought this up in her episode. These are the previous 2 episodes before you of being teachers and creating safe spaces for these kids they've both got 3rd graders that feel safe feeling all their emotions, and that they're giving them the tools to feel all those things and process them and not stuff them and not feel bad if they're a little boy crying or trying to help somebody, so they can hopefully, always feel safe in their classrooms. And they've both talked about how that's more important to them than any math or reading or whatever they learn, because that's just transfers through your whole life. And you guys are trying to do that with Deacon too. So hopefully he can be in some spaces that continues to be celebrated. But I think that's one of the greatest gifts that you've brought him from what you learned in your own experience.
And having a little boy for me was tough because of that. Yeah. I would tell you, like, for me, my relationship with Hazley comes so naturally, she's just, and her and Deacon are so different.
They are. So
Hazley is like, now Hazley, so it's funny. If we get a call from the school about Deacon going to the principal's office, we're just in shock and awe. Like, are you kidding me? We're talking about the same kid that happened one time and it turned out to be something that was not even a big deal. But with Hazley, like, I almost expect it. She's so tough and ornery, and so for her, it's about like reeling her back in,
We're finding healthy spaces for her to work that out, I think, too.
Exactly. And so but at the same time, she's so we have a running joke where she's either going to be a CEO or a leader of a prison gang, and we kid about it. But now I have to add comedian to it, stand-up comic, because this girl is hilarious. So we had a teacher conference with her preschool teacher a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. And one of the things that she brought up about Hazley was that Hazley is just hilarious. And it's the most common thing we hear from everybody. You never know what's going to come out of her mouth. She's so witty and funny. But something she's struggling with right now is her speech. Yeah. So she's got a bit of a speech impediment. And so we're getting her into speech therapy to work on that. And that's something that's been, I think, hard, starting as she recognizes it. Yeah. It's been hard for her because she's very intelligent. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you can't always understand what she's trying to communicate if you're not around her a lot. Sure. And then that makes her frustrated because you're not understanding her. And I think that's an important thing too, because you'll have parents that you'll have a child with a speech impediment or, other issue, and they don't recognize it early or they don't want to, or and that's a hard thing. And I understand that. But at the same time, it's like the earlier you can intervene and help them out. Right.
And give them tools.
Exactly. Because by the time she's 16 years old, this is going to be a forgotten about thing that you talked about just because you got them the help that they needed. But she is. So Hazley's it's funny because she has the speech impediment. And I think that it's funny, it'll create this perception, I think,
or stigma, even
stigma that she's not intelligent.
Right.
But she is wicked smart.
Yeah.
Like she's
not missing a thing.
She is not missing a thing. She is on top of it, and she remembers everything. Like my hat.
Yes.
Lost in the, or flying off my head in the lake when we're on our boat. We hear about that months later. Like a funny one is we have this young group of girls that Kendra my wife is a teacher, and she teaches high school. And there's this group of girls that kind of came around when the kids were really young, and they've just stayed around. And they've been a big part of my kiddos' lives. And it was funny because Madison was back from college. She plays college softball, and Madison was back from college for Thanksgiving, and she goes to put Hazley to bed, and I hear Hazley up there yelling. And I'm like, what's going on? So I go up there and she goes, Madison did not turn on my puppy. And I look, and she has like this thing, a projector that goes up on the ceiling, and Hazley loves dogs. And it's a projector that changes like a puppy and a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah. And
she looks at me, and that's not the funny part. The funny part is she goes, just like Nana, Papa, and Jewel. And she always goes, Jewel. And
poor Jewel.
and that happened almost a year ago, that they forgot to turn her puppy on, and it was like, I'm like, Hazley, sissy bear, you got to let this go, And Madison was like, I haven't been around for a while. I forgot. I'm sorry, And it was, but I turned it on and then put her to bed, and it was funny. But it's for her, that's going to be her thing to overcome. Is right now, early on, is that kind of that speech impediment, because it's going to take a while for her to. It's going to take probably a couple of years before that gets really sorted out.
Sure.
And I want to make sure that she understands that, hey, I am still smart. I'm very, I'm an intelligent person. I have this obstacle that I have to overcome, but everybody's going to have something. Yeah. And I think it's important that we instill that in her in an early age too.
Absolutely. And celebrate all those parts of her, because, I think sometimes, and we'll talk about this, really goes with the embracing layers piece that comes with our kids too, is accepting all the parts of them and celebrating all parts of them, and find those ones that are more challenging. Okay, how can we route this energy to be, productive and healthy? And you get, you like we did, you've got two kids that are natured very different ways. So you get lots of practice in all those things. Yeah. The importance of setting and coming back to your why in everything you do.
That's a good question.
Well, and figuring out even what that why is, because I think you've had a journey with that, even removing expectations of other people and kind of coming into your own, I think.
So you're going to notice a theme here, and the theme is always Kendra, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's important to understand. It's like when Kendra caught me out of left field, she was not my typical girlfriend. She didn't play sports. She didn't play sports. She had no interest in sports. She didn't care about them. Nothing.
She wasn't blonde.
She wasn't. Yeah. Right. And she wasn't. Yeah. And among so many other things, but she,
that's its own episode.
Right. But we were polar opposites, and she's a classic case of opposites attract for obvious reasons. But so it is funny because we were on, and if my work listens to this, I want them to know that I don't have any plans to quit, but we're on our way to a wedding this summer. And she goes, how much money would you feel comfortable having if you were to quit your job? And I go, well, what do you mean? And she goes, so if I can rewind the clock, if I could do it all over again, knowing what I know now, I would have been a high school teacher, probably taught biology or something like that, chemistry, all the whole thing that goes along with it, and coach sports. Mm-hmm. But that didn't make very much money. And so I didn't do that. I was like, I have a responsibility to do this, when really my only responsibility is, I feel like, to be a good parent. Mm-hmm. From my children,
sure.
And a good husband and other things. But I always think about it in terms of my children. If I'm supporting my family, my job is to support them in everything. all aspects of their life, their emotional development, their physical development, not just,
having enough money,
which
again comes from the context that we grew up in.
Exactly. And so I was like, well, why? And be either way, I asked, again, she goes, because I think you should become a teacher. She goes, we'll sell the boat. She's like, downsize the house. She's like, I think you should become a teacher. And it's funny because like the why question for me is always a matter of, I ask it on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Why and how did I get to this point? And she was right. Cause if I'm being completely honest with myself, being in healthcare really is not my passion anymore.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to come to terms with because I spent and devoted so much of my life doing that.
Sure.
And it's tough because it's one of those things that comes like natural to me instinctually. But when I find like I coached a baseball team this last spring and I found like true joy in doing that. Like I felt like, wow, I'm myself again.
Yeah.
This feels good. I know. And I took the bad news bears. We didn't have the first practice. And I was like, oh no, this is not looking good. And took them to, and it's not just me. I want to give credence to my support staff. I had a great group of parents. A lot of stuff goes into this.
Sure.
But to watch those kids develop, and it's not, and I had some good ball players and those ones, yeah, they're fun to watch.
Yeah.
But the ones I was really proud of were the little guys that I knew that at the beginning of the season couldn't even hit it off a tee, let alone somebody throwing it to them, that by the end of the season, we're getting little base hits.
Yeah.
What a rewarding feeling that was.
Yeah.
And even in college, I was a TA. And I remember, teaching lectures. And I went back to visit. And this has been a long time ago now. And I remember so for people who don't know, I was also an economics major. And I used to teach. So I was basically a TA for the econ classes, 201 and 202, which was micro and macroeconomics. And like 3 years later, I come back and I hear a Mr. Ledford. and like I'm looking around, we're at a bar. It was called the Starlight. They had great food. I'm sitting there with Victor, we're eating, and I'm looking around, and this kid comes over to me, and these lectures would get pretty big, so I don't recognize everybody. And he goes, I just want to thank you. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, you are the only reason I passed microeconomics. He's like, you explained it in such a great way. He's like, I understood it. Thank you so much. He's like, I wouldn't have passed that class. And I was like, what a warm feeling that was.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, don't you get that from healthcare? Yeah, you do get it from healthcare at times, but it's a different type of thing to mold a young mind.
Yeah.
And for me, that's really, I would say probably my passion is working with kids and molding young minds. And I gotta, so getting back to the why am I doing what I'm doing? And I think that's the question I have to answer on a continuous basis,
Yeah. And being willing to even think about that, I mean, Brady's thinking about now in his world, he's like, I'm not sure I want to keep doing this line. And I've been doing it for 30 years. It's never too late to ask those questions and make sure we're being true to ourselves, I think.
Yeah.
And that's how we continue to evolve and grow and be our best versions of ourselves. And kudos to Kendra for the 1,000th time, for being one to bring that up and just being like, this stuff's nice, but it's not necessary to have peace and contentment and, happiness. But that's something we had to shape because Dad, and I want to qualify this, Dad grew up very poor.
Yeah.
And was in paying rent and moving out at a very early age because of the economic situation in his family. So first and foremost, it became his goal to never not have enough money. And that went too far the other way, unfortunately, from what his original intent was. But that was so consequently, we very much saw that. And I think that had a lot to do with how you ended up on the route you're on. And I think it's hard too. You're super smart. And so this goes nicely into expectations and growing out of other people's expectations and starting to create our own and embracing our own expectations. And we've hit on this a lot throughout this, but I think that's something you really are navigating, have navigated. You've spoken to it already. And also with what you are learning from it, how that affects how you parent your kids and even how you and Kendra build your life together in terms of the world's expectations, the family's expectations, the culture's expectations versus what's true to you.
Yeah. So the expectations part, that probably is one of the single most defining aspects that's led me to this point in my life. Right. It's funny. So I grew up, as I alluded to earlier, I grew up an angry kid.
Yeah.
I was angry. Mm-hmm. I would act out in class. I got in trouble. I'd get suspended from school. I'd get into fights. And not once did everybody just say, oh, he's a problem child, this, that, and the other. Never once did I ever have initially somebody ask the question, why is he so angry?
Right. What's going on?
Why? What's going on? Why is he so angry?
There was always consequences, but never the root question of why.
Never a root question why. They'd send me to this place called the Friendship Room, and I worked with Miss Dunaway, and she was great. I loved her, but we never really got to the root of why am I so angry?
Right.
Until I got to, I would say, Miss Holliker again, and she was the one. So I was always ahead in class, right? I did well in school. I was always I always call myself a closet nerd because like I played all these sports, I did all these things, but behind closed doors, when I was 9 years old, I was a big Stephen King fan. Probably not for an 8 or 9 year old to be
reading. That's what happens when you have all these older siblings.
Yeah, right.
Reading Stephen King in second grade.
Right. And so I remember I did a book report. So we were told to do a book report. I was in third grade, do a book report. So I did it on it. Right. And so while the kids are doing like Goosebumps or whatever, I do it on it. And
Captain Underpants, you're doing it.
Exactly. And then I had to write the report, and then I had to give an oral report. And the look on the kids' faces were just terrified, and it was funny. I remember my teacher was like, first of all, I want to tell you, that was really good job. I will say she was like, you did a really good job, and I don't want to take anything away from that. She goes, but maybe next time, let's not pick Stephen King, and I was like, well, that's who I read. I was like, what do you want? I go, what would you rather I pick? And she named off a few. And I'm like, oh, those are boring,
I've read those 2 years ago.
And so then Grandma got me. Mm-hmm. Grandma was always, I think it's an important point that I bring out there too. Grandma was always like my rock, and I had the fortunate privilege
and very intuitive.
Very intuitive. And I always had the fortunate privilege of having her close to me.
Sure. Because she'd moved up from California at that point.
Moved up from California. Yeah. Exactly. And she had got me she even got me a series of books on Hall of Famers. Mm. So then I started doing book reports on baseball Hall of Famers. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, then all of a sudden I realized, it's like I had a knack for stats, and then I became a statistician, in fourth grade. But either way, nobody, I think, really knew like that I really had the capacity to do what I could do until I started getting to high school.
Yeah.
Started getting to high school. And I remember I didn't recognize it then, but I was always like taking classes with the grade ahead of me. Mm-hmm. I was in calculus as a sophomore, and I maxed out all my science classes by the time I was a junior. I remember we call it, they call it AP, but it's called college prep English at the time. Yeah. But I remember like, I was the only junior in there. And then when all the seniors left in spring quarter, at the end of spring quarter or whatever, and I'm the only one left in class, they're just doing the Strickland. And so like, she let me pick 2 movies to watch the last 2 days of class. And so like, but I remember I did extremely well on my SATs.
Yeah.
And I remember I had a guidance counselor that didn't really,
there wasn't guidance counseling at Castle Rock High School then. Let's just call it what it is. Like my guidance counselor, I don't even know who my guidance counselor was in high school.
Right.
I don't even know.
I know. The reason I know mine is because I got in trouble for months. But
I think mine might have been Mrs. Quigley. I don't know. I don't really remember.
I remember mine. I'm not going to say his name, but because he wasn't my favorite individual. But either way, I got to let that one go. He, basically, and when they get this back, like, and he's like, where do you want to go to school? And I'm like, at the time, I was like, well, I'm just going to go to school wherever I can play baseball or football. And I'm like, where can I go? He was like, wherever you really want. And I was like, that was the first summer I was like, I'd never studied for the SAT. I hadn't really looked into colleges that much because I didn't really know that process. But then I felt like there started to be like this expectation. Like my peers started realizing it. And like, I actually got voted most likely to succeed in my class, which I actually found to be pretty neat.
Yeah.
But it was an expectation.
Right.
So then I started defining success in the way that the world defines success.
Yeah.
Okay, I have to go to a prestigious school, and I have to achieve this. I have to achieve that. I have to make sure that my name is known. Yeah. And if I could go back and talk to that 16 to 18-year-old kid now and redefine success to them,
right?
My life may have went very different.
Yeah.
Do I regret? No, because I think from the things that I've learned, I'll be a better parent, and I'll be able to help Hazley and Deacon navigate that much easier than I did. But expectations, those can be crushing.
They can be. And I think too, because again, I know I keep talking about this, but it's the root of it. We grew up in a house where achievement was celebrated, and that's how we received love and affirmation. And, it was. And if we didn't achieve, then that was bad. And there was very much a good, bad scenario with that. And so that's how we saw ourselves as acceptable.
And I would say this, it's like, for example, Dad and I, the reason I stopped playing college baseball, if I'm going to go to the root of it, was because I was burned out, and it was a way for me to escape. It was to get, and I look back on it and regret it because, I always say to kids now, play until somebody tells you can't anymore. Basically, at some point in time, we all come to a point where we're not going to be able to play, the professional sport or whatever have you, but don't stop before your time is up. Keep living
and stop for the right reasons.
Stop for the right reasons. It's like, okay, you know what? I've accomplished what I set out to accomplish. I'm satisfied with that. And I can walk away from this with my head held high. I walked away with my chin down and staring at my shoes, not feeling good about the scenario at all. But I did it because for me, it was like Dad and I would always butt heads when it came to sports, and when it came to baseball, I'd go 3 for 4. And the question would be, well, why didn't you go 4 for 4?
Yeah.
And we would watch.
Yeah. Same thing in track. This is where Caleb and I had a similar experience.
Oh, if we would clash, and same thing in football, it's like, I'd run for 160 yards. Well, why didn't you get
200
yards? And it's like, well, we still won, 48-6. What does it really matter? Yeah. But again, we would clash. It was about those things that we did wrong. Now, I will say that looking back on it, I think in his own way, he was trying to help in certain aspects. I think he was trying to motivate. He was just going about it in the wrong way.
Yeah. And he wasn't able to finish anything because of having to work and earn his own way. And it wasn't modeled to him. And that's not making excuses. And there's ramifications for how things went with us. And he's had to deal with those, but it
took its toll.
It took its toll on him and on us.
Because one thing I'll say too about, you go shoot basketball with Dad, and even at, he's 74 years old, Dad can shoot the lights out of a basketball.
Yeah.
He really can. And he never had that opportunity to realize his full potential. Right. And I think with you and I, especially because we played a lot of, sports and achieved high, and even with Clint, and Clint had a very different personality type, and
he didn't really know what to do with that.
Exactly. And I feel like, Dad saw one way to motivate,
Yeah.
But what I've learned is there's different ways to motivate different
people. Exactly. Based on how you're built and who you are and what's important
exactly.
to you.
What's that? What's going to work for you?
Yeah.
I had a baseball coach who really understood that about me, Dennis Mackey. God bless his soul. He's passed away now, but he really got me. He really knew how to get the best out of me.
Yeah.
And I played very well under him. And but for me, when I left baseball, it was because I had to escape that, and I just want to make sure that when Deacon and Hazley walk away from whatever it may be that they're doing, if they have to, if they come to that point, that they do it under their own, under good circumstances as much as you can. If it's athletics, you can never predict. You might have a career-ending injury, but it may not be that. It may be that, you want to be a professional singer. I don't know. Yeah. And although I've heard both of them sing and they got a long way to go. It's precious, but it's not beautiful.
Only beautiful to parents' ears.
Yeah, it's the best. But I just want to make sure that I allow them to set reasonable expectations for themselves. Mm-hmm. And in doing so, I have to be able to do that for myself.
Right. It's because it's modeled. I mean, we can say things till the cows come home, but our kids see what we do. They see what you do. And that's the truth teller. Absolutely. Absolutely. Accepting, and we talked about this too, accepting the layered aspects of ourselves. I think for you and I both, that's been a tricky one to navigate. Yeah,
I'm complicated, and.
But I think it goes back to, even as we were kids, we didn't have parents that knew how to accept the layered aspects of us. Yeah. So we were brought up very much feeling like only certain parts of us were worth touting and the other parts of us were not. Yeah. And so that it did start there. And then we've had to navigate that. And then also learning as parents how to navigate accepting all the layers of our children when we're still trying to figure out how to learn to accept the layers of ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough, I mean, you always hear the onion, analogy, and peeling back the layers of an onion. If I had to go back and look at the most honest form of myself, I would tell you that I was probably a highly energetic, but yet pretty sweet kid, but our parents, sure, but also society as well. I feel like
culture has a very different boy, girl.
I feel like there's like this, you have to be like masculine. You have to be tough. You have to be, strong. Yeah. And it's like, well, I mean, there's different ways to be tough and strong. Right. And it doesn't mean that you have to be physically, imposing. It may be that you have a strong spirit and that, you're going to do a great job of, maybe you're meant to be a pastor, or maybe you're meant to be, a professor, or, whatever it may be. But, you want to be strong in the way that makes you most happy. Right.
But that doesn't show up on the playground.
It doesn't show up on the playground. It's the fastest kid. It's the kid that, doesn't get pushed down. It's the kid that can throw the ball the farthest or jump off the swings from the highest level, whatever it may be, and it's culture that sets those expectations. And, and you see it through our school systems. You see it, you see it on TV, you see it everywhere, and somewhere along the lines, I got it into my head that, well, being kind and, soft isn't necessarily going to get me very far in this world as a boy. Yeah. So then I started getting a little more chiseled, if you will, I started getting this extra layer of just like, getting a little bit harder, a little bit more turned off to life. Yeah. And it was being conditioned to be that way. Yep. And celebrated. And then as I got older, I got so deep into that those layers kept building up that each one compounded and led to another problem, whether it be an anger issue, whether it be a hot temper, whatever it may be. Sure. And being really, really hard on yourself. And being really hard on yourself. Like I was my own worst enemy in that regard. It's like, it's like I would do something wrong and I'd be like, wow, I'm such a disappointment, and it's like I struck out. I'm such a disappointment. I fumbled the ball. I'm such a disappointment. It's never, it's like, oh, I fumbled,
Yeah.
So
move on.
Yeah. And move on. Next play,
Yeah.
And
memory of a goldfish. Quoting Ted Lasso.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's a great one, actually. It's funny you bring that up. I just talked to Deacon about that yesterday. He misses a shot and he puts his head down and he's warming. And I go, stop. And he comes, I go, Deacon, why are you upset? And he goes, because I've been making that shot and I just missed that shot. I go, Deacon, buddy, short memory. I'm like, who cares? I'm like, Steph Curry is going to go down at this NBA as the greatest, 3-point shooter in history. And he has missed thousands of shots.
Yeah.
But I'm like, you don't make them all, bud.
Yeah.
But, each time, but at each level, each stage of my life, I developed an additional layer that wasn't necessarily a healthy one.
Yeah.
And now starting in my late 20s into my 30s now, and I'm 36 years old, I'm finally starting to peel those back. And sometimes, I had a phrase I was going to spit out and completely spaced. Relapse is a part of recovery. You hear that all the time because there's times where I'll catch myself and I'm like, wait a second, why am I so upset about this?
Yeah.
It's like, that's not an appropriate way to handle it with the kids or maybe handle the situation with another person, whatever. I could have been better there. But the difference is this time I don't sulk in it. I look at it and I go, okay, yes, I made that mistake. That was my mistake. I own that. How can I make it better the next time? And if it's with a kiddo and I hurt their feelings, if I hurt Deacon's feelings or Hazley's feelings, how do I fix that now? What do we do to fix the problem? And a lot of times it just comes back to me and saying, you know what? I'm really sorry.
Yeah.
I apologize. I overreacted. I shouldn't have done that. And, please forgive me.
And I think that's something really, really important that you just hit on there is, again, it goes back to that modeling thing of our kids understanding and it being okay. And this is just in our parents, that our generation, we're so much farther, but parents and grandparents, no one apologized to their kids. That wasn't considered right, respectful. And I think we finally started learning it is actually okay because it shows we're human. And it also shows them that it's okay to make mistakes and apologize for them too.
Absolutely. Deacon's really he's really starting to write now. So it's funny because if he's mad, he'll write down why he's mad and he'll give it to us. It's kind of funny. And Kendra laughs about it. She's like, you know what? He's working on his writing skills while he's expressing himself. So it's a kind of a win-win,
Exactly.
Or if he's sorry,
he's not bottling it up.
He's not bottling it up, or if he's sorry, we make him, write a sorry letter. But I think it's important too. It's like, you can even go so far as that expectation part where when a kid writes a letter, let them write that letter. You don't need to stand over and correct all the spelling and tell them that they need to add more space and this word should have been capitalized and you should have put an apostrophe here and a comma there.
Right.
Just let them write the letter. Yeah. There's a time and a place for everything. And I feel like when I'm sitting down and I'm teaching him the schoolwork or Kendra, and we're teaching him math, it's like, okay, now is the time, like, okay, buddy, this is why you do that. That's the time and place.
Yeah.
When he's frustrated or mad and he's just writing it down because he's getting it out and that's how he gets it out.
Yeah.
Read it, empathize with it, talk about it.
Yeah.
But don't say, buddy, you should have done a capital T and a lower.
Right.
And I see that happen so much.
Yes.
I can't even tell you, it's like we'll get a letter, that you can clearly tell that's written by a kid and you look at it like, there's no way that kid came up with that.
Yeah.
They're in the second grade. So I think it's very important to, and I'm being very nondescript in that particular scenario because of the recent events. And again, I don't want to put anybody on blast. So but it was a situation where it was an apology letter written to Deacon, but I'm like, this is not authentic. And this was not really truly written by that child.
Yeah.
And I was like, let the kid, if the kid's not sorry, let him write down why he's not sorry.
Right.
And then maybe they can talk about it.
And then we can get to the root of what's actually happening.
How many times do we see it on TV where somebody gets up and they're like, no, I'm sorry because such a, you don't mean that.
Yeah.
It's like whether you should or shouldn't be sorry is not the focal point right here.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you do what you did?
Yeah.
Okay. And be honest about it.
Yeah.
And maybe you can have an honest conversation with each other about it and get to a point where you really are sorry about it.
Yeah.
But as long as you lack authenticity, there's never going to be any progress in that.
No. Or healthiness for yourself.
Yeah. And I want to say something too that Dad actually wrote to me. And this was actually very telling. He said, I can even almost read. He said, be better than I was. When he was talking about a situation with Deacon in basketball. And I was like, and he wasn't at the game, so he has no idea. And that says a lot too. I'm like, you know what?
Yeah. Doesn't have to be a lot of words.
No way in a million years would that have ever even came out as a thought in his mind.
Sure.
20 years ago.
Absolutely.
And when he said that, I was like, you have to appreciate that. It's like, I was like, wow.
Yeah.
How about that?
There's a lot in that sentence. Yeah.
There's a lot in that sentence.
Absolutely.
Sometimes less is more.
Yeah. Well, and he's learning to accept the layered aspects of himself. How do you live out feel? The name of the podcast is Finding Empowerment, Embracing Layers. And I think a nice segue into that, if you don't mind sharing, is what you do with the kids at night before bed, how you ask them their questions about the day. Do you mind sharing about that?
Yeah. So, and it always depends on it. Unfortunately, recently, we don't always get an opportunity to do it as much as I'd like. And I did it a lot early on in the year because so Deacon, as we've alluded to, is a very emotional kiddo.
Yeah.
Kendra and I went on a vacation to Mexico for a friend's wedding. And he had a really hard time with us being gone.
Yeah.
And so, there were some behavioral things that happened while we were gone, some things that came up. We came home, it was kind of a mess.
Yeah.
And so what I started doing with him in that situation is I sit down and we just sit with our legs crossed and he sits across from me and we talk about the day. I'll ask him, he'll bring something up and I'll ask him, how did your day go? Never yes and no questions. That's one thing. Mm-hmm. And then I'll ask, and he'll tell me how his day went. And I'll ask him, tell me about something that made you happy today. Mm-hmm. And he'll tell me about something that made him happy. And sometimes we'll do it in the truck, even while I'm taking him to school or getting him or picking him up from somewhere. Yeah. And I'll say, tell me something that made you sad. And he'll tell me something that made him sad. And we'll go over that. Like we'll work through each one of those situations. Like, okay, so that made you sad. So maybe this time, let's try this instead. Or what do you think that you could have done in that situation for it not to affect you like that? Or what made you mad? And really, I allow him. And Hazley, we're kind of starting to get there now because she's getting to the age where she's starting, especially with the speech stuff. Sure. Frustration. Where you really want to allow them to, I feel like, define the conversation. Yeah. And allow them to lead the conversation so that it's like, because if I just reach a conclusion without even asking, or if I'm trying to take them down a certain pathway, I'm not going to get an honest answer. Yeah. But just allowing him to sit there and process that. And when I did that for a month solid when we came back. Yeah. And we saw the behavioral issue go from a problem to it was almost like it never even really happened. Wow. And no, he's a 7-year-old little boy. At the time, just 6. Yeah. And, and Hazley 3, there's going to be bumps in the road. And that's going to happen a million times over from now until, I'm long gone. Mm-hmm. But if I can do that, I feel I can help them process that emotion. Mm-hmm. I think that I'll at least set them up so that they can be honest with themselves. Yeah. Have better communication with their loved ones in the future. Absolutely. And teach them to communicate that. Well, and know how they feel and not stuff things. I mean, that to me defines finding empowerment, embracing layers right there. You're giving them the tools to be able to do that. Talk about it for yourself. When you hear that, it's really a roundup of all that we've been talking about. But for you, how does that show up today? Yeah. So I try to at least once a week kind of sit back and reflect on the events of that week. Yeah. Again, I'm very introverted. Kendra will tell you, like, she had no idea for a long time that I was dealing with some depression and things like that. And it's because I hide it. I bury it. But I sit there and I try to at least process the events of that week. What should I have done differently? It's like and a good example, and Deacon keeps coming up because he's just at that age where he's playing sports right now. So things are just coming up. And there was a situation with basketball recently where, like, I taught him like the same thing over and over again, and he just wasn't getting it. And I got frustrated and I snapped at him, and I shouldn't have, but I did. I snapped at him, and I'm like, I looked at him with Deacon, how are you not getting this? Like, that's pretty much the tone I use. And he looks at me and he like gets a shamed look on his face. And then I feel like this, like tiny, I'm like, that's not the way I should handle that situation. So then the next time we went to the gym to play, I asked him the same question. I go, what do you do in that scenario? And he started to get that. I go, no, don't worry about it. What do you do? And he goes, I don't know, Dad. He goes, I think I do this. And I go, that is what you do. I go, why were you scared to say it? And he goes, because, I know you got mad last time and I don't want you to be mad this time. And the first thing I do in that situation, and I said, buddy, I'm sorry I made you feel that way. Don't ever don't worry so much about what I'm thinking to the point where it starts to affect your self-confidence and your self-worth.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to do that because I recognized it. And I was like, so how do I address that situation to fix it so it doesn't continue to happen?
Yeah.
Like, because I noticed he was looking up at me in the stands. And I go, Deacon, I go, buddy, I don't want you looking at me in the stands. Don't need to find me. Don't worry about me. Nothing. And then he goes, well, it helps sometimes when you tell me where to go, though. And I was like, okay, sure thing, bud. But he did it last night, and all I did was give him a thumbs up. I was like, good job, bud. Good job. Thumbs up. Good job. Because I even after the first game, I was like, okay. And I was like, I got to turn this into a positive. With Hazley's she's so much easier in regards to just like, she's so funny, but even with her, I would say the hardest thing for me with her, it has been, if it sounds crazy, kind of grasping. Sometimes she's natured like me in the sense that she's very like go-getter.
Yeah.
But at the same time, she can be so laid back about certain things.
Sure.
And it's hard to describe. That's the Kendra side of her.
Yeah.
And it's figuring out how to relate to that,
Yeah.
But I think self-reflection is a big part of it. At the end, I try to do it at least once a week where I look back on my week and I go, these are the things that came up. These are the things that bothered me. Why did they bother me? And how do I prevent them from bothering me in the future? Yeah. Or how do I rectify the situation so that it doesn't hurt somebody else in the process?
Yeah.
Because it's going to help, and I think that's an important part too. It's like, realize that we're always a work in progress.
Yep. Absolutely.
I'm the most imperfect person I know because I know myself probably the best. Right.
Right.
But we can always continue. We're never going to achieve perfection. And that's not my goal. My goal is just to be better than I was before.
Yeah.
The objective is to improve.
Rapid fire. So name 5 activities that nourish you.
These ones are going to be fun. Okay. Motocross.
I knew that was first.
Yeah. Motocross. Wakeboarding. Writing. So I'm actually in the process of writing a book. And I've been
you've been doing that for a while.
I have. I've got like 3 different books, but this one I'm hard at.
Okay.
I would say teaching. I really enjoy teaching.
Yeah.
And then I would say meaningful conversations.
Yeah.
And that can come out in a variety of different ways, but meaningful conversations with people from all walks of life.
Yeah.
That's probably the coolest part of my job.
Yeah. You really get to do that. That's
You
really
do.
true.
You get
Yeah.
I mean, and I worked in community health for a long time too.
Yeah.
And so, and then I worked inner city Baltimore, and it just gave me such wonderful opportunities to talk to people from all walks of life.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and I think that's an important one too. When I did my ER rotation in Baltimore, often the groups that I identified with the most and got along the best with were the kiddos and guys and gals that you would see to be a little bit rough around the edges.
Yeah.
You know, the ones that you hear about those stereotypes.
Right.
You know, but for some reason, I always got along best with people that were just a little bit more rough around the edges. I don't really know why, but
yeah,
we connected well.
Yeah. Well, and just the ability to do that. And I think is a great gift. All right. 5 words on how you want to feel in the next 6 months.
Happy, fulfilled, accomplished. Accomplished not in the sense of, like winning a trophy.
Right.
But accomplished in the sense of, I set out to be better at this because it was important to do so for Kendra or the kids, whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
This one's going to be funny, but efficient. That's my economic mind. Efficiency means a lot of different things. Efficiently managing my time and whatever whatever else it may be, if I could stop. And I would say loved. Because that last one's a tough one.
It is. The loved one and the accomplished one really stuck out to me because you, despite being introverted, your relationships are very important to you. Yeah. They always have been. And so I think there's a lot that's tied into that for you. Want to talk about that at all?
No, you're right. I mean, I think the hard thing for me is, I'll use your daughters as an example. Mm-hmm. I was so excited when we moved to the Tri-Cities. I thought this story about your samurai being covered in dust was hilarious, by the way, because it's blowing a gale out.
I'll go out in a convertible.
Yeah, but so when we moved back here, I was like super excited. I was like, because you guys were only like 2 hours away, and then you guys moved for the betterment for you guys, which has been worked out, but it was kind of soul crushing to me a little bit because it's like, oh my gosh, I finally was close to them. Mm-hmm. I was going to have all these wonderful opportunities. And then you guys moved and I was like, it's gone. And then I don't feel like I did a good job of continuing with the communication aspect of it. I didn't do a good job of keeping up with Kylie, Courtney, and Sierra like I should have. Mm-hmm. I feel like I failed at that. Mm-hmm. Part of it was tough because I was also getting my feet off the ground and my life going. Yeah. And I was trying to balance all of these things. Yeah. But I feel like I really dropped the ball there. And I think I went from being someone that was present in their life to a degree, whether it be they're not necessarily physically, but emotionally, to where I was absent. And mm-hmm. And that one was a tough one for me to swallow. Yeah. And so I would say that I should have done a better job with. And some of that goes back to, I never brought this up, Tucker.
Yeah. Yep.
Tucker,
I thought of that earlier.
Tucker was Clint's oldest son. Yeah. And he was a big part of my life for his first 3 years. Yeah. And suddenly he just got yanked from my life. Yeah. And I've only had minimal communication with him since. Yeah. But I didn't get to see him for years. But that one really changed me as an individual. And so I've always had this thing where abandonment issues almost, if you will. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when I start to feel like things are kind of getting ripped away, I have a tendency to back away to protect myself. Yeah. And I need to do a better job with those situations, because it's not just, I use your daughters because the situation, but it's one of many situations like that in my life where I'm like, I need to do better at that. Yeah. I need to do better with even Nana and Papa. Yeah. And calling them to make sure, because, we've had my Uncle Brad passed away this year.
Yeah.
And now recently, Kevin Kearney, that's Chris, our brother, his father-in-law.
Yeah.
2 men that played a really important role in my life.
Yeah.
All gone in the same year, too young.
Yeah.
And you just never know when that's going to happen.
Yeah.
We all have a clock, and we don't know when it. We never know when when that alarm's going to go off and our time is up.
Yeah.
God knows, and that's it.
Yeah.
Outside of that, you just got to treat every day as though it's a gift, and try the best you can to do better at managing the relationships that you have and repairing the ones that you've lost.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, as I said, people, super smart guy here, privileged to call him my brother. And someone I'm just really, really proud of. And I know that sounds like the big sister in me, and it is the big sister in me, because I've just watched him navigate a lot of really hard things in a way where he's just continues to be willing to learn and grow and be better. And I'm just so thankful for the time that I got with you today, and thankful that you're my baby brother. You're 36 years old, my baby brother. And
I lived longer than I said I would.
You did. He was convinced he was going to die by the time he was 30. So that's a whole other episode. But thanks so much for the time today. I want to let you get back to your family. It's Sunday and it's precious time. You don't get a lot of downtime, but thanks so much for joining me today. And folks, again, check out embracinglayers.com and at Embracing Layers on our Instagram to learn more about Caleb and all that he cares about and is involved with. And thanks so much for the time today. I love you.
Love you too.